It's 6:30 on the morning of June 6, 1944. The grey waters of the English Channel are churning with the largest amphibious invasion force in human history. 156,000 Allied troops are storming the beaches of Normandy. The fate of Europe hangs by a thread. But hundreds of miles away, in the Wolf's Lair headquarters, Adolf Hitler is hesitating. His generals are screaming that this is the invasion, the decisive moment, but the Führer refuses to release his two prized panzer divisions stationed near Pas de Calais. He is absolutely certain that Normandy is a distraction. He believes the real attack is coming later, at Calais. He believes this because his most trusted spy told him so. He is waiting for a phantom army that doesn't exist, commanded by generals who aren't real, funded by money that has already been stolen. Hitler has been paralyzed not by a weapon, but by a chicken farmer from Spain. This is the story of espionage. We tend to think of spying as a world of silenced pistols and high-speed chases, but the true history of intelligence is far stranger. It is a history of creative writing, of corpses dressed in officers' uniforms, of gender-bending diplomats, and of wooden carvings that listen without batteries. It is the story of how the course of human history was altered by the architecture of lies. To understand the scale of the deception that saved D-Day, we have to look at the man known as Agent Garbo. His real name was Juan Pujol García. He was a balding, unassuming poultry farmer who despised fascism. When he offered his services to British intelligence in 1941, they laughed him out of the office. So Pujol decided to freelance. He moved to Lisbon, Portugal, but told the Germans he was in London. He bought a tourist guide to Britain, a railway timetable, and a large map, and he began to write. For years, Pujol sat in a room in Lisbon, inventing a network of 27 sub-agents. He created a Welsh Aryan nationalist, a gibberish-speaking seaman, and a moonstruck American sergeant. He wrote hundreds of letters in invisible ink, detailing the movements of convoys he had never seen and troop morale he had imagined. The Germans were so convinced by his fiction that they stopped trying to recruit other spies in England. Why bother, when their man Arabelle had it covered? By 1944, the British MI5 had realized what was happening, scooped him up, and brought him to London to legitimize his operation. The climax of his career, and perhaps the greatest practical joke of the 20th century, came just hours before D-Day. Pujol sent an urgent message to Berlin warning that the Normandy landings were merely a diversion. He claimed a massive force, the 1st U.S. Army Group, was poised to strike Calais. The 1st U.S. Army Group had insignia, radio traffic, and inflatable tanks, but not a single soldier. It was a ghost army. Hitler bought the lie. He kept the reserves back for weeks, waiting for the blow that never came, while the Allies solidified their foothold in France. Weeks later, the German High Command was so impressed by Pujol's accurate intelligence regarding the diversion that they awarded him the Iron Cross. He remains the only person in history to receive both the German Iron Cross and the Member of the British Empire Award for the same war, from opposing sides. But if Garbo proved that you could fool an empire with words, British naval intelligence proved you could do it with silence, specifically, the silence of the dead. 1 year prior to D-Day, in 1943, the Allies were preparing to invade Italy. Sicily was the obvious target, a stepping stone to the continent. Winston Churchill famously remarked that anyone but a bloody fool would know it was Sicily. The job of intelligence was to prove that the Allies were, in fact, bloody fools who intended to invade Greece instead. Enter Operation Mincemeat. 2 intelligence officers, Ewan Montague and Charles Cholmondeley, conceived a macabre plan based on a memo once written by Ian Fleming. They secured the body of Glyndwr Michael, a homeless man who had died of poisoning in London. They dressed the corpse in the uniform of a Royal Marines officer and gave him a new identity, Major William Martin. The brilliance of Mincemeat wasn't the body, it was the pockets. They filled Major Martin's wallet with the detritus of a real life. There were theatre tickets, a receipt for a diamond engagement ring, and angry letters from his bank manager about an overdraft. There was a photo of a girl named Pam, actually an MI5 secretary, and love letters that were heartbreakingly mundane. They created a human soul out of paper scraps. Chained to his wrist was a briefcase containing top-secret documents outlining the invasion of Greece. On April 30, 1943, a submarine released the body off the coast of Huelva, Spain, where the currents would wash it ashore into the hands of pro-German Spanish officials. When the documents reached Berlin, the deception took hold. The details were too banal, too specific to be fake. Hitler moved Rommel's tank divisions to Greece to defend against an attack that wasn't coming. When the Allies hit the beaches of Sicily, they faced a fraction of the resistance they expected. Thousands of young men lived to see the end of the war because a dead man in a wet uniform had already fought the battle for them. The line between fiction and reality in espionage is often blurred, and nowhere is that line thinner than with Dusko. If you have ever watched a James Bond film, you have seen the shadow of Popov. He was a Yugoslav double agent, codenamed Tricycle by the British because of his penchant for bringing two women into his bed at once. He was a gambler, a playboy, and a man of immense charm who operated under the nose of the Gestapo. In 1941, Ian Fleming, then a naval intelligence officer, was tasked with shadowing Popov at the Casino Estoril in Portugal. Fleming watched as Popov, holding $40,000 of the British government as money, roughly $800,000 today, placed it all on a single card to bankrupt a rival. That night, the character of James Bond was born in Fleming's imagination. But Popov's story has a darker, more tragic chapter than any Bond novel. In August 1941, the German Abwehr sent Popov to the United States to gather intelligence. They gave him a specific questionnaire, asking for details on the water depth and anti-torpedo nets at a specific American naval base, Pearl Harbor. Popov recognized the terrifying implication immediately. The Japanese were planning an air raid on the Pacific Fleet. Popov took this intelligence straight to the FBI. He walked into the office of J. Edgar Hoover, expecting to be treated as a hero. Instead, he was treated as a delinquent. Hoover was a Puritan who was disgusted by Popov's lifestyle. He had arrived in New York with a glamorous woman and was living in a penthouse. Hoover distrusted foreigners and despised double agents. He ignored the questionnaire, threatened to arrest Popov under the Mon Act for transporting a woman across state lines for immoral purposes, and buried the file. 4 months later, the bombs fell on Pearl Harbor. It is one of history's most agonizing what-ifs, a moment where the clash between the gritty reality of spycraft and the moral rigidity of bureaucracy cost thousands of lives. If you're finding yourself pulled into these hidden corners of history, I'd love for you to take a brief moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It's a small gesture, but it truly helps us dig deeper into the archives to bring these untold stories to light. While Popov and Garbo used their personalities as weapons, other spies used their very identity. To understand how fluid the concept of truth can be in espionage, we have to go back to the 18th century, to the court of King Louis XV, and the Chevalier d'Eon. D'Eon was a fencing master, a dragoon captain, and a diplomat. In 1756, the king needed to open a secret channel with Empress Elizabeth of Russia to form an alliance against Britain. The English had blockaded the borders to French male diplomats, so d'Eon did the unthinkable. He traveled to Russia disguised as a woman, Lyra de Beaumont, and infiltrated the court as a maid of honor to the Empress. The plan worked. d'Eon charmed the Empress and secured the treaty, but the disguise became the reality. For nearly 50 years, d'Eon lived interchangeably as a man and a woman. In London, d'Eon's gender became the subject of massive speculation. It was the talk of the town. Betting slips were issued on the London Stock Exchange, with hundreds of thousands of pounds wagered on whether the Chevalier was male or female. d'Eon played into the mystery, refusing to confirm either, wearing the uniform of a dragoon one day and a corset the next. It wasn't until d'Eon's death in 1810 that an autopsy confirmed he was biologically male. d'Eon had turned his entire existence into a state secret, proving that the best cover story is the one that people are too confused to question. As the 20th century marched on, however, the era of the flamboyant, personality-driven spy began to fade. The Cold War brought a new kind of espionage, cold, remote, and technological. The art of the deal was replaced by the science of the signal, and the masterpiece of this new era was a device, known simply as the Thing. On August 4, 1945, a group of Soviet schoolchildren presented a gift to W.A. Varel Harriman, the U.S. ambassador to the Soviet Union. It was a magnificent, hand-carved wooden replica of the Great Seal of the United States. Touched by the gesture, Harriman hung it in the most secure room in Moscow, his private study at the Spaso House. For 7 years, that wooden seal hung on the wall. It witnessed confidential conversations, strategy meetings, and private mutterings of 3 different U.S. ambassadors. It wasn't until 1952, when a British radio operator accidentally picked up an American voice on an open frequency, that the US State Department realized the ambassador's office was bugged. They tore the room apart. They found nothing in the walls, nothing in the furniture. Finally, they cracked open the wooden seal. Inside, they found a device that shouldn't have existed. It had no battery, it had no wires, it had no power source. It was invented by Leon Theremin, the musical genius. It was a passive cavity resonator, a small membrane with an antenna. It sat dormant, undetectable by any bug sweeper, until the Soviets parked a van outside the embassy and blasted a specific radio frequency at the window. The radio waves powered the device. The membrane vibrated with the sound of the ambassador's voice, and the signal was bounced back to the van. It was elegant, invisible, and terrifying. It marked the end of the romantic era of spying and the beginning of the surveillance state. The Great Seal bug hung in plain sight for 7 years, a silent witness to the fact that we are never truly alone. What do Agent Garbo and the Chevalier Dion teach us? That the deadliest weapon in espionage isn't some high-tech gadget. It's our own willingness to believe a good story. We trust the uniform, the official-looking document, the fancy award hanging on a wall. As long as there are secrets worth protecting, someone, somewhere, is busy crafting the perfect lie to steal them. So, which of these masters of deception impressed you the most? Hit that like button if you think the chicken farmer spy, Agent Garbo, was the ultimate hero. Or drop a comment if the morbid genius behind the corpse in Operation Mincemeat blew your mind. And hey, do both if you believe the real James Bond, Dusko Popov, outshines them all. Let me know what you think, and I'll see you in the next video.
Case closed on this chapter, but the world is full of unsolved questions. Join the investigation by subscribing now.